Hello, Garland Nixon here, hanging out with Peter Erickson, and we got some things to talk about. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here, hanging out again with Peter Erickson. Oh, I noticed many of the people in the chat know him better as Dad from Conversations Amongst the Ruins. Great show, I love it. Great dynamic, fantastic dynamic between you and your son. You know, I have like several friends that watch the show, and they all talk about the dynamic between you and your son. That just makes it fun to watch. You know.
Yeah, well, that's
at any rate.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, that's why we keep on doing it, because it's real. It's a chance to get together and talk, and if somebody wants to listen in, that's all the better.
That's their problem, right?
Yeah.
Or that's their misfortune if they happen to be unlucky enough to. But everybody really enjoys it. People really love it. I enjoy it, and we've learned something, and we pick up something, and we get a a steady-handed view of the world from Peter Erickson.
Yeah.
All right, let's get going.
That's right.
Peter, let me start throwing this at you, because there are, I have, and I know you have heard this discussion so long. Is it the U.S. and Israel? Is the dog wagging the tail? Is the tail wagging the dog? Right? And then, of course, there are people that say, no, no, no. It's all England. It's the British Empire that's behind the whole thing. The title of this is Israel Wants War, America Doesn't. But with a caveat.
Mm-hmm.
I read that Trump was saying that the Americans were saying to the Iranians, maybe we could work something out if you stop selling oil to the Chinese. So for all of it's Israel, and America doesn't want any parts of this. There's that other side where America was like, we're going to go to the to the Asian Pacific and beat the heck out of the Chinese. And then they woke up one day and said, crap, if we go to the Asian Pacific, we're going to get our butts in. We can't beat them. So I got a plan. We'll cut off their oil everywhere else. So your thoughts on that whole dynamic? I'll put it together and throw it to you.
Yeah. By and large, I'm in the tail wags the dog school of thought, by and large. But but life is complicated. The world is complicated. It's never that simple. I understand that. And, when we're talking about Iran, that's something that, okay, why are we going after Iran? I think the main reason is this Israeli obsession, particularly Netanyahu's obsession with destroying Iran. This is something he's been harping on this for, I think, like people take it all the way back to like the 1980s, but it definitely, starting in like the early 2000s, constantly, we got to attack Iran. America's got to attack Iran, again and again. And the pressure's there, it's coming, and a lot of it clearly is coming from Israel. But that's not the whole thing. There are people that hated Iran, just because of what happened in 1979 and the hostages. That was considered a humiliation. And there was one reason that, Jimmy Carter lost that election. And there are people who remember that. I remember how big a deal that was back then. It was something that just gripped the nation, and everybody, what was it? The bring the hostages home, the yellow ribbons and all that kind of stuff. And it was never felt, it was felt among a lot of people that we had never taken revenge on Iran for what they had done. Now, I think that's a terrible way to look at it. A more honest way would to look a little bit deeper into history and then say, well, why did they have this Islamic revolution? Why were they so angry at the U.S.? And of course, you have to go back to the early 1950s and the CIA-sponsored revolution, where we overthrew the president Mossadegh, that they had duly elected, and then planted the Shah over them. And when they finally got rid of the Shah, they turned and went after the U.S. and for obvious reasons. So, first of all, let's say fair should have ended right there. Say, okay, we're even. All right, okay. But then also, it's just been, 47 years since then. And we've done all kinds of terrible things to Iran. We've imposed these very cruel economic sanctions. Many children have died because they couldn't get medicine. People in general have been impoverished by it. We've together in league with Israel, we've carried out sabotage actions and assassinations. And of course, there was the Soleimani assassination, a great hero of the Iranian people that was killed along with others. And to say that we haven't had revenge, I I think that's, first of all, we didn't need to take it. We've been cruel enough. We don't need to do anything more. But I know there are people who still think that way, and that's just even independent of Israel. So we have to look at that. But then there's also the geopolitical thinkers, the ones who actually don't have the obsessions that are maybe a little bit more, or at least they don't think they have the obsessions, or their obsession's different. It's not so much ethnic, or it's not so much about payback. It's looking at the big geopolitical chessboard and saying, hey, if we move this piece here, if we deprive the Chinese of some oil or whatever, that and so all those things happen. They're all in there, they're all in the mix.
Yeah, I'm with you. And so the reality of it is it becomes a Rorschach blot at some point. And it is depending on how if I look at it and say, if one person says, no, Israel wants greater Israel, and they're religious maniacs, I can say that's true. Mm-hmm. You say, but the United States wants to dominate the region where all the oil is, and they want to control the oil so they can cut off China or whoever else. Yeah, that's true. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Somebody can ask you 10 questions, and it's true, because it's an oversimplification.
Right.
I think. And that's what people want. They want an easy, simple answer. But when you look at the neocons, one of the things I think you have in a deteriorating empire, you have a lot of factional fighting. Do you notice that?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, I guess we're certainly seeing that under Trump. I think the guy does not run a very tight ship. I mean, let's just be honest. He appoints all kinds of people, and but well, first of all, he's so inconsistent himself. It's just not, that he lays down the law. This is going to be our strategy. These are the guardrails. He says something one day and then something different the next. And I think he really just forgets what his position is from day to day, depending on who he's been talking to. So he surrounds himself with different people. Now they tend to be people of a, I think this time around, the first time he just appointed the so-called swamp creatures. It was the same old establishment figures, so that we got pretty much establishment policy, through his first term. This time he's really looked for loyalists and bootlickers, right? So, but these people, they know that they just got to keep on buttering them up, and that's why they're able to occupy their positions. But they also have their own agendas. Some of them are, Israeli firsters. Some of them are, let's say, maybe you could call them America firsters, but of a certain type, just looking for an opportunity to express, American military power or our might through, military means. I think maybe Hegseth is somebody like that, the Department of War rather than the Department of Defense. And they understand that this person can be molded and shaped, and he's not really too clear on his own thinking. So they all go to work on him. And then, they have and I think that's, again, what we're seeing in the case of this Iran strategy, if you want to call it. We've got the Armada in the Arabian Sea and some kind of negotiations supposedly going on. And I'm sure there are some people who kind of understand that, hey, this is going to be really bad, and this might not work out for us. Even if it could be, people that are concerned about the price of oil and are trying to tell them, this could have a real impact. But there are the Israeli firsters and and other maniacs there who just don't care, and they're working on him too. And what I'm afraid has happened is, we just heard, I think just yesterday and today, that possibly two, at least one carrier strike force is going to join, the USS Abraham Lincoln there in the Arabian Sea. I think that's the Gerald Ford going to be pulled out of the Caribbean. But there was also an order issued to prepare for deployment, issued to the George H.W. Bush, that strike force, carrier strike force, which is on the East Coast. So we could end up with 3. And this is something that Charlie and I were talking about. That Charlie made the point is that probably somebody told Trump, it's like, yeah, you want to do negotiations. Maybe he really does, because I think Trump actually understands, he does have some sense about this. He does not want to be in a real war. He likes, again, just to punch somebody in the, kick somebody in the back and then run, do it in the middle of the night, that kind of thing. It's right. It's like, the midnight special operation or the assassination, or that's the kind of thing that he wants to do. And I think he's finding, well, man, I don't know if I can do that. I thought, and so let's look at the negotiations. Or maybe I'll be the deal maker. I'll have achieved some peace that hasn't been possible in 3,000 years or something. That's what I'll announce. So they see him leaning that way. So they say, yeah, but to support negotiations, you got to get more forces in there to pressure the Iranians so that they'll go along with it. But of course, they don't really want the negotiations to cease, and they know that they won't. And that once they get all these forces, you create this momentum that's going to be really, really hard for him to hold back.
Well, and I think they know that there is an element, probably even in the military, saying, man, they got a lot of horsepower. Do you really want to get in this fight? And what they want to do is get more ships and stuff there and say, see, now we're okay. Yeah, we were a little slight when we only had 1. We got 3 now. We can kick them in the teeth, and try to get that. I feel, I don't know how much authority he even has to say no. Trump, if as Bill Parcells said, you are what your record says you are. Donald Trump has never wanted to get in a big war. He look at what he like you said, he'll go in and play footsie with somebody. He thought the Houthis were weak. He was going to go in and punch the Houthis, slap them around a little bit. When they kicked back, he got the hell out of Dodge so fast. Mercouris used to always talk about the neocons and said they have no reverse gear. Donald Trump keeps his vehicle in forward and reverse at the same time. You can walk Trump right up to the line, and the neocons are like, we got him. Yes, he's going to attack, and he gets I take a pull back. He frustrates the neocons.
That's true. Well, actually, I think I just saw something, maybe it was in the American Conservative. It says, thank God that Trump does have reverse gear. Basically, that wasn't those exact words, but that was the point. We should be happy about it. So I think that's what he's getting cold feet now, but he may get positioned and find himself in a place where it just becomes really, really hard for him to pull out. And then it's like, I think I've made this point before. It's just like you get to the edge of the cliff and you're standing there. If you keep on standing, the longer you stand there, the greater the chance you're going to fall over. It just takes one misstep. It's just like they just need to convince them one day to do it, to press the button, and then it's over. Then you're over the cliff, and you can't go back after that. So I'm afraid. I think I hope that we'll have another wonderful case of taco. And that he'll declare that something happened and the Iranians made him some great promise and everybody thinks he's wonderful and he's heading home and nobody's done anything so more incredible in the history of the world. And I say, oh yeah, okay, great. I'll applaud too if that's what he does. If he goes home, that's not impossible. We know that we're talking about Donald Trump, but there is a real big chance that that's not going to happen and he's going to be maneuvered into a war.
And if that's as I've been saying, if he does, his goose is cooked. If he gets into a war, he's done. I mean, it's absolute. So it's like, the other part of it is, let me throw this at you. There's the Epstein files. Now there's great speculation that there's more stuff that they could threaten Trump with, but that's something we can't know. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I mean, we could throw this. Yeah, sure, they'll threaten Trump to show pictures or something, but we can't know that. So it is what it is. But here's the other part. He's a very wounded president right now because of the Epstein files. Pam Bondi just went out there and made an absolute monkey of herself. And she looks completely and totally incompetent as a result of what she was put on the spot and she did not exactly shine when she was on the spot.
Yeah,
right.
So I hear. Yeah.
That's like, somebody's supposed to be a great quarterback, and they're like, okay, now we're going to put them in for the big game, and they throw like 3 straight pick sixes. Get off the go. Yeah, no, you can't. And she just looked like a fool. Let me be kind. I don't think she should be in charge of anything bigger than a 7-Eleven or some kind of a corner store. Based on what I saw, she's not.
Yeah.
She's not a great politician by any stretch of the imagination. My point being, Trump would be going in this already wounded. He is extremely politically wounded right now.
Right.
Let me change this different. The entire system is desperately wounded.
Yeah.
Maybe mortally.
Yeah, no, it's very true. I think what is the approval ratings at 38%? I mean, it's really low. It looks pretty good compared to Keir Starmer and Macron and Merz, but 38% is pretty.
Was it John Wayne that said they're lower than a snake's belly in a wagon rut?
Yeah, right. But that's bad. That's very bad for any U.S. president. And more than that, this whole project, he hasn't really laid the groundwork. Just in past wars when we've assembled armadas or whatever, it was kind of true of Venezuela too. I mean, it's like most people, what are we doing there? And then he came up with the story about the drugs, and then it was the oil, and we're finding something similar. It's not. He hasn't really convinced people of necessity for war. People by and large were convinced of it after 9/11, and then all the lies about the weapons of mass destruction and all that hysteria then. And so people were actually behind that war, at least when it began. And here, there was a real kind of, again, what it was like back then. We don't have anything like that. So you don't have any kind of reserves of goodwill and commitment behind you within the population. You better do something clean and fast, and it better look good on TV, because otherwise, people are going to start asking if we start to pay a cost, and obviously, I think we will, and it could be a huge cost. People will start asking why. What the heck are we doing over there, and why am I paying $10 a gallon at the gas station, and why are they sending my buddy overseas, and what's going on, and I don't think it's going to work out. Again, it's just that they just don't have those reserves of commitment and of support for this. So he's going in on very thin ice to begin with. That's right. And then also, even if he does succeed, let's just say by some miracle, he pulls something off. Right. It's one of these, again, Delta Force operations, and maybe it really amounts to nothing, but it looked really cool on TV, and he sails off and he says, once again, well, this was the greatest mission in the history of the world, at least since Venezuela or something. And, and his fans applaud him. And, at the most, it'll just give him a little bump in the polls. It's just the people they're not asking for this. Right. I think in general, they're saying, look, we have problems at home and you need to address them. What are you doing, playing these games overseas? So even if it goes well, I don't think he's going to get any benefits. It just seems to me there's really only a downside to this whole thing. This is very poorly thought out on his part.
And additionally, and I know they are maniacal, so they don't care. Israel, and you've been talking about it for a long time. You've been saying, their days are numbered as far as getting support in the United States. The younger people don't like them, and more now they're losing. There's a cascade of Israeli support, flowing away.
Yeah.
If he does this, and which inevitably, there will be American fatalities, and there could be a lot of fatalities. There will be rage against Europe, particularly amongst conservatives. There'll be a rage against Israel, saying our people are dying for Israel. And what little support for Israel will really start to hollow out even more. And what is a anger, a frustration with Trump and his policies regarding Israel, if the flag draped casket starts coming home, will turn into a rage against Israel. That will be a sweeping rage going into the midterms, because the likelihood also is some kind of an economic problem. You put those two together and people start screaming, our people are cannon fodder for Israel, and they're wiping out our economy.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah. Well, no, that's a very good point, because that's something else that's different about this war. First of all, okay, he's going in, he's politically wounded, he's low in the polls, he hasn't laid the groundwork, he hasn't really done the job of convincing people that a war is necessary, right? All of that's true. And again, this is another war in the Middle East. Now, in the past, it was like you never looked at the man behind the curtain, so to speak. It was just like it was verboten to talk about Israeli influence, right? I remember what a big deal it was when Mearsheimer and Waltz's book came out, The Israel Lobby. There was a lot of howls and protests. That looks pretty tame now compared, and
Yeah.
it was something. It's so you're also going into this, as you say, with a really different view of Israel and a willingness, let's say, to question Israel's role. And we're seeing, recently we had Netanyahu pay that visit to Trump, and Netanyahu openly stated, and it's being reported in Israeli media, that he wants Trump to launch a war. And a lot of people, you got to stop and ask, well, wait a second, why do we have to launch a war for you? I mean, this is the sort of thing that only conspiracy theorists talked about in the past, but it's really just sort of out in the open now. And a lot of people are seeing it and they're discussing it. And they may be a minority, but it's a growing minority, and especially true among young people and across the political spectrum too. It has to be said. It's not just left or right, it's both. And so, yeah, that could be another important fallout of this war, is that this is, in the past, that question was just asked by, a few people, some academics, some conspiracy theorists, so-called, or whatever. But now there's going to be a big chunk of the population is saying that, why did we do this? This was a disaster, and it was not in our interest. And it was clear that the president of Israel, or the prime minister of Israel, was trying to push us into this. And that's going to have
Now,
consequences.
somebody makes a good point here. I don't see it. Let me find it. It was a really good point. I don't see it now, but what they said is, why are we acting like they care whether or not we approve of a war, in a nutshell, right? Which I agree. We understand at this point that they don't really give a crap what we think. Yeah. Fair enough. But I do think that they can't completely ignore public outrage, because, number one, they're politically wounded and they're suffering a crisis of legitimacy.
Right.
And because of the Epstein things, there's a complete crisis of legitimacy, the legitimacy of the ruling elite to rule. And they know that there can be a point where they don't have enough legitimacy to rule. They don't want to face that, but they know that there could become a point where the people just say, uh-oh, this ain't working, and things start to fall apart. So I agree, they don't give a crap what we think as far as starting a war. But there is individual concerns. Trump, am I going to be thrown out of office? Blah, blah, his own concerns. Right. And there are other people saying, oh my gosh, it's the midterms, and if we go into this thing and things go bad, we'll all get wiped out. So albeit they're their own personal things, and they're not what we would like them to be, they can serve the same purpose.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. It's not just, you can suffer electoral defeats. The whatever party comes in, it seems to seem like they always end up doing the same thing. But anyway, hey, but you and your friends were kicked out, and that's no fun. So you want to try to stay in, right? And I hope at some point we get real alternatives, and maybe we will, but we're not getting them so far, by and large. But electoral defeats. But then the other thing, again, is I think this is, again, Trump understands this quite well. Is that, he likes to do these nice, quick, clean, telegenic kind of operations, because you don't need a whole lot of support for that. You don't have, you say, he can just do it because he wants to do it. And he'd rather keep it that way. To go beyond that and to actually wage a real war, you actually do need to have the people on your side, because people are going to look at it and say, no, I ain't signing up for that. I'm not going, I'm running off to Canada or whatever, I'm just, you just won't get the cooperation from those, that potential cannon fodder that you want to use. So it does put a break, on some of the plans. I think that is something that they're aware of. So they can't completely ignore popular will, especially when it comes to a question of a real war.
Yeah, politically speaking, let me ask you a question since we're talking politics anyway, going up to 2028, if we're fortunate enough to make it, which I think we will. And if we don't, then there's no point in us not talking about it anyway. We got nothing to lose, but we're here now. The Democratic Party. Here's what's interesting about the Democratic Party. Someone was talking to me about, hey, they want to run Buttigieg, they want to run Harris, they want to run Shapiro, they want to run this person, that person, of who they want to run. Which I made this point that you just demonstrated the whole problem. They can't have a primary, because if they have a primary, somebody like me will be elected. You know what I mean? Yeah. If the Democrats have an honest primary and somebody runs and says, no wars, I'm against all wars, and I don't agree with what Israel did, and if you vote for me, we're not going to keep them giving them money, and I'm getting out of all these wars. I'm sick and tired of it. If somebody runs in the Democratic primary, they will win in a blowout. Yeah. The Republicans, if Thomas Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene ran, they will win in a blowout. The system is in deep trouble because it has what our person was saying earlier, it has ignored us to a point where there's a whiplash effect coming. And I think both parties got big trouble going forward, maybe even in the midterms, but going forward there, if they were to run a legitimate election, their worst possible nightmares would come true.
Yeah. Well, you could say it already happened. I think it's New Jersey. Correct me if I'm wrong. There was a guy, I think it's Malinowski. He was, a Democrat faced with a primary, and he had become critical of Israel. I mean, he hadn't gone out and used the word genocide. He really wasn't a full-fledged, anti-Zionist or anything like that. But he strayed from the Zionist plantation, the AIPAC plantation. So AIPAC decided to go and went after him. And so they put a lot of money into defeating him because he had become critical of Israel, really moderately critical, but he was critical. What the end result was, they got rid of Malinowski. The woman who won the primary is just a flaming anti-Zionist. so it's like, oops. Yeah, so that's a perfect example of what you're saying, a primary. And hopefully, that's going to happen, across the country. I certainly hope so. And we'll see. It's going to be interesting. That would be the best thing, for this to happen peacefully, that we have a real kind of a revolution with real alternatives. I'm become very cynical because you've seen how it just seems like no matter what. I think it was Tom Woods that said, whoever you vote for, you end up with John McCain, right?
Yep. Well, yeah. And so the thing about it is this, and I'm cynical enough to say, if that was happening, they just shut down the elections. If they woke up and looked and they said, oh my gosh, we're going to have 535 Garland Nixons. And we're going to have Garland Nixon president and Garland Nixon VP, some completely anti-Zionist, anti-imperialist, anti-war person like me who says, well, I think perhaps people should have health care. No, hold on there, Sporty.
Yeah, right. There would have to be. No, I think so. Yeah, sorry. I think there would be a coup to save democracy. Yes, exactly. We've seen things like that happen in Europe already. Seriously. Oh, wait a second, the wrong guy's winning here. This guy wants to make peace with Russia. We got to save democracy.
And then they just make up a charge. They're like the guy Ceausescu. Yeah, he's stole something. Stole what? I don't know. Okay, then he's working for Russia. Okay, well, where's the evidence? Oh, we don't have any. Then he stole something. Wait a minute, we're going back to that. You know what I mean? With that guy, whatever his name is, not Ceausescu, but it sounds like that.
Yeah, Georgescu, the guy in Romania.
Like Georgescu. Yeah, whatever the case may be, they just cooked something up. They just cooked up.
Well, that was admitted to later. Yeah, I mean that they claimed that there was some sort of information operation, blah blah blah. But it turned out that it actually, to the extent that there was one, it had nothing to do with them, but it was actually one of the liberal parties.
Right?
And it's just well, they'd already canceled the election, so
Oh darn, we made a mistake. Won't
Yeah.
happen again. Yeah, and I feel that based on what I've seen, look, um, I don't care what happens. They can't let people look into those. They can't give up the rest of the. They can't give up the rest of the um, Epstein files. They can't give them up because you look in there, you're going to find Seth Rich's name in there. You're going to find all the Russiagate stuff in there. Every rotten, filthy thing that's been done, every underhanded, diabolical move that's happened over the last couple years, you're going to find something in the last 20 years. You're going
Mhm.
to find something in there that they were. I mean, think about this. How the hell does Epstein hit the lottery for $29.3 million?
Yeah.
How the hell does he hit the lottery 2 days after he gets sentenced? It's like, all right, go to prison. Ah, darn. 2 days later, good news. You hit the lottery for $80 million. You'll take home 29.3. How does that happen? When you look at that, at that point, I'm like, why is anybody buying a lottery ticket? I think you kind of see how this works.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it's the guy was phenomenally wealthy, and it was never even clear what he did for a living. You just had to wonder what was going on. He had his own island. He had like the largest mansion in New York or something. It was. We're not talking about just wealth, but we're talking about the top 1% of the 1%. And I've never understood. I've never had it explained to me where that came from. So yeah, you have to wonder.
Here's an example, and this again shows how rotten the system is because of the way they put it. J.P. Morgan Chase, listen to this, reported over 1 billion in suspicious trafficking. They didn't report it. They did it. They did it, and then they got found out. Listen to this. So they reported over 1 billion in suspicious transactions linked to Jeffrey Epstein. They reported it. Boy, they were good guys. Who'd they report? J.P. Morgan Chase processed over 1 billion in transactions linked to. Wait a minute. They reported it. They processed it. They were flagged as suspicious and related to human trafficking activity. So they did it. Then they reported, these things that we've been doing are suspicious and could be related to human trafficking, right? Look at this. From 1998 till 2013, and they had no idea. The bank filed multiple SARs, but significant reporting occurred only after Epstein's arrest and subsequent death. By 2019, only about 4.3 million was flagged, while posthumously another 1.3 billion. The transactions included cash withdrawals, transfers to individuals with Eastern European names, which raised flags for potential sex trafficking, right? Oh, by the way, Epstein's victims got 290 million in a settlement, right? So under the Bank Secrecy Act, banks are required to report suspicious transactions within 90 days. Let's see, 2003 to 2019. So I think it was more than 90 days.
I think so. Yeah. I have to pull out my calendar to make sure, but I think you're right.
Yeah. So the bottom line is, nobody's going to. I read where one of the things that he did was, if you put in or take out more than $10,000, they have to report it.
Right.
But what people do is they'll take out 99.99, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or put it in so they don't report it. That's a violation of the law. It's illegal to skirt just under the amount to avoid it. And he did it repeatedly for years.
Mm-hmm.
They never notified it. So in reality, not only did he violate the law, they violated the law. They were accomplices in violating the law because you let somebody do something and they're violating the law and you let them keep doing it for years and years. And then once everything fell apart, they said, oh, by the way, there was some suspicious activity that's been going on with this guy for the last, 16 years. And we thought you might want to know about it. But where they are now, they can't touch him because he is part of the system.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that's probably in general, like that $10,000 transaction limit. That's for the little people. If you're a big client, and moving around tons of money, let's we're all friends here, and this guy, and we get our, our 0.5%, which amounts to a huge amount of money when you're dealing with those big sums.
Look at this, just as an example of what I was talking about. Look how it's reported. Here's two different ways it's reported. The Guardian, J.P. Morgan warned the U.S. of $1 billion in Epstein transactions, possibly related. They warned the U.S. government. Oh my gosh! Here's New York Post. J.P. Morgan processed $1 billion for Jeffrey Epstein and kept him for a client for 15 years.
Yeah,
but according to the Guardian, they warned him. Warned implies that they told them prior to something.
Right.
Not after. After I do something, and then I warn somebody, that thing that I just did, just warning you, I might do it, but I already did.
Yeah, I did it 20 years ago, and now I'm warning you, right? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
They notified, they processed, they alerted, they warned. J.P. Morgan brass ignored flags. Right. But look at this side by side. J.P. Morgan warned U.S. of $1 billion in Epstein transactions. J.P. Morgan ignored flags as Epstein moved $1 billion.
Yeah.
Now, which again, you know what that shows us? The system. He's the system. Why would all of these people write things to protect him? Not him, he's dead. To protect what was going on.
Yeah. Right. It's him, what was going on, all his friends, and it's the bank, and it's all the, the bank's clients are, they're all part of the same club, I guess it comes down to, and everybody understands it. And if you want to succeed as a reporter, you write the right kind of headline,
Let's see. Here's one. And for people that don't understand what's going on here, here we go. Here's another one. I mean, I could do article after article on HSBC. How HSBC laundered money from Mexican drug cartels, paid a US $1.9 billion fine, and hardly anyone noticed, right? For years, the world local bank accepted vast deposits from Mexico's Sinaloa drug cartel until Mexican bank supervisors and U.S. investigators intervened. Well, here's the question. If you paid a fine for $1.9 billion, how much did you make for years? So when you look at it and you say, oh, geez, J.P. Morgan is laundering money for pedophilia, for murder and cannibalism, God knows, and for all kinds of, financial shading dealings that he was doing. HSBC, what are they doing? Oh, they're laundering money for drug cartels. You start to realize the truth about the Western banking system.
Yeah. I bet after that fine, they all had threw a party and said, wow, we ended up with a profit of $7 billion or whatever.
If you look at what happened, they hired James Comey to iron out a deal with the U.S. government over their fine, and they promised they'd never do it again. Yeah. Then they got caught doing it again.
Yeah, and they paid the fine and they made another profit, probably. That's What was it? I'm trying to remember the name of that family that was responsible for the oxycodone play.
The Sackler family.
The Sackler. Right. Okay. Exactly. It's the same. They ended up paying that huge fine, but I heard, but they still made out like bandits. So we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar fine. But they looked at it and said, yeah, okay, this was, still a good business. That was.
So what happens when people, again, and it gets us back to Iran, and something we haven't seen. People have lost faith in the system. People now see the system as this monster. They see the elites for what they are, these, psychotic pedophiles and worse. How do you you're going to drag people into a war that they don't want to be in when you've lost credibility?
Yeah. We are, I think, entering dangerous waters, and that's this country has gone through some great crises in the past. You could say the Great Depression followed by World War II, but we survived and we came out stronger for them. We survived. There was a great deal of upheaval in the 1960s. A lot of it, connected to the Vietnam War, both domestic and geopolitical. But we survived it, and I think we came out stronger when it was all over. But this time, I think in both cases, actually, that if you look back at it, there was a great deal of faith in American institutions, in the government, in the churches, in all the various institutions that have kind of held together and supported American society over the decades. And if you look at it, it doesn't matter what institution it is. There's been a steady decline over the last few decades that has accelerated, especially during the last 5 to 10 years. So it's just we're talking about the rock bottom approval ratings for Trump. Actually, he's doing a lot better than Congress is, or the media, or those are down in Keir Starmer kind of territory, down below 20% or something. It's really low. So the thing is, there's this general loss of faith in all kinds of institutions, and there will be a crisis. There will be an economic crisis. It's just inevitable. It's a matter of time. It's going to happen. And all these different games that Trump is playing, at some point he's going to make a misstep, and he's not going to get his telegenic in and out, Delta forces mission accomplished. It's just not going to happen, and we're going to have a real war on our hands. There's another crisis, but this time we're going into it. Whether it's war or it's an economic collapse or it's both, without those institutions, without the faith of institutions. So I think we're in for real trouble. We can have. I'm not going to pretend. I don't have a crystal ball here. It's just going to be a mess. And, there isn't a center to pull things back together again. I really don't think so. So we may see civil war. We may see, let's hope, just, the peaceful alternative, secession. Or we can see some really crazy movements, take over, either from the left or the right, or, who knows. But I think that just America in general it's not just Trump. Even when Trump is gone, he's done a lot of damage. But whoever takes office, after him, the damage has been done, and it wasn't all done by Trump by any means. This is a long time process. I think people don't want to fixate on him too much. These are long-term trends, that are going to put whoever's in power, 3 years from now, in a real difficult situation. It's going to be very hard to try to really hold the country together, I think, and especially, again, if a true crisis hits. That's what puts that's the stress test. And I think that's a stress test that this government and this society just might fail this time around. We survived in the past, but I'm not so sure that we're going to survive it this time.
Let me ask you this. I'll take a different perspective on some of the things that have happened, whether it's the 60s, the Vietnam War. Could it also be possibly that each one of these things put a dent in the armor, and collectively it's gotten to a point, you know what I mean? Wherein, you had wars, and now, let's face it, one of the reasons that Trump was elected was because people were sick of wars, and they said, hey, we don't want any regime change wars. And he said, I'm not going to do that. So it rather than, like, the one way to look at it, which is legitimate, we got through these things and we were strong and we made it. Another way to look at it is every one of those things caused a little more, that people got a little more sick. Oh, wait a minute, we're going to Iraq. Wait a minute, again in Iraq? Oh, wait a minute, now we're in Afghanistan. We're doing the surge in Afghanistan, but why are we fighting it? But where are we taking both? The people died in Niger. I remember that. Maybe everybody was like, I didn't know we had soldiers in Niger, and a couple soldiers just died in Niger. Then Syria, some soldiers died in Syria. What's going on in Ukraine? And people are war weary. So I think all these wars, and then more and more people saying, as they see the deterioration economic around, what about I got potholes in my street, my schools are falling apart. So I think these things have grown all together to a point where collectively, individually, they're a problem. Collectively, they're catastrophic, and people are feeling the pain. And now it's like this would be the straw that breaks the camel's back, and a big straw, straw at that. Not a straw. This would be the telephone pole that broke the camel's back. Fell on the
Yeah,
camel
yeah.
and smushed him.
Right. No, no, it's true. Again, I mean, I was just talking about the, the long-term trend. Really, it actually does start, I think, like you going back to the 60s. So in a way, for whatever happened in the 60s, yeah, some things were not repaired. I think you can find there was this resurgence in faith in America following World War II, and we came out of the
Yeah.
Great Depression. But it's I think a little bit more complicated story when you talk about the turbulent 60s and the Vietnam War. Because you just see from that time that sort of like the skepticism of American institutions, which I think was justified, has grown, ever since. As there's so you see the steady deterioration in really the perceived legitimacy of American institutions, but there's also the economic landscape, which you just mentioned. It depends on how you play with these statistics. You can make things look pretty good. But one thing, I was just looking at a statistic just the other day, and that is like the amount of, oh gosh, okay. Well, it's a measure of wealth, and I forget the technical term for it. But that has, that has undergone a dramatic change, actually, since the 60s, and it is accelerating again. It's just that increasingly wealth is concentrated in the hands of a very few. So we're talking about, you saw it happen during COVID. I mean, the multi-billionaires, some of them went from 20 billion to 100 billion. And I mean, there was this incredible acceleration of the concentration of wealth, and it has continued. It's not like it had stopped after that. So this is part of the thing too, is this economic landscape. I keep on reading that inflation is like, it's only been about 20% over the last 10 years. I can't believe that. I mean, I remember buying things for like a half or a third of the price just a few years ago. And my income hasn't gone up. And, for the rest of us, it's just those people that have a lot of money and assets, their assets are being inflated. It's just part of this game. And so they're fine. They're riding this wave, and they keep ahead of it. Their assets are inflating faster than the price of goods is inflating. But for the rest of us, again, the great majority of people, that's not happening. So yeah, there is this growing frustration, this growing anger, and this growing sense. And I think you're right. It's one reason that Trump was elected, that the people in charge don't care. And I think that's really clear. But it just turned out that Trump was very much a false prophet. So yeah, what are we faced with? I don't know. It's just we're going to have another false prophet, or is it just people going to just stop voting? I don't know.
Well, and the issue with wages is too, with the issue of inflation is, okay, it may be 20%, but wages haven't gone up a penny. So normally, let's say inflation goes up 20% and wages go up 18%, then effectively you have 2%, and that's what usually happens. Wages go up, right? Wages went flat. So now you got wages sitting here, and inflation is just walking away, and a person's still making the same, and eggs cost 3 times what they were, but you're not making a penny more. And so I think that's what's happened. Neoliberalism suppressing wages puts people in a position, because in the end, it doesn't matter. All the numbers don't matter. The only, or what we call them, and the economic indicators are irrelevant. Here's what's relevant. When a person gets their check, what can they afford?
Right.
And can they buy a house? Can they buy a car? And we're increasingly seeing that the answer is no. People can't afford a house, and people can't afford a car.
Yeah. No, it's very true. I mean, it's just there's maybe about 10% of the population, I don't know what it is, that are asset owners. And again, they've seen their assets inflated in the stock market and whatever. But for the rest of us, that's the reality. It's just that, I just can't buy nearly as much as I could with my paycheck. A lot of things are just beyond the realm of possibility for a lot of us. The American dream is gone.
Let me ask you this. I have Andre Martianov on, and he talks a lot about America losing the arms race, right? Particularly technologically and in all spheres, America's losing the arms race. And you look at, okay, we're ready to throw tomahawks at Iran. But man, those are like created in the 80s. And I mean,
Hmm.
yeah, have they had some upgrades, but still they're what high
Right.
supersonic. They're not, you know,
Right.
mid to high supersonic. They ain't the best missile on earth. They're not as good as the missiles that Iran has.
Uh-huh.
And it seems to me that China and Russia are stepping up to the plate now, giving them some help. And we don't know what we're getting ourselves into. And I don't mean that China and Russia actually fight, but
Right.
you know, what if they've got some additional technology, of additional defensive technology, additional missile technology? I mean, Russia and China's technology is extraordinary, especially
Yeah.
Russia. It's
Yeah.
proven. Russia's proven on the battlefield. So to attack them, not knowing what level of technology they have, I mean, literally, you could attack them and lose the war in 2 days. You could literally
Uh-huh.
lose the war, depending upon what they have. You could get
Hmm.
hit so hard that you literally, within days, the war is lost, and there's no way to go to say it any other way. I'm not
Yeah.
saying that's going to happen, but
Right.
that potential exists.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, I think, well, one thing is, again, we have a military that is kind of living in the 80s still. It's just like, it's still 80s and 90s weapons. That's what we're doing. We're churning them out. There's the kind of things, again, that, yeah, they worked well in Iraq. You know, they work well in bowling third world countries. But Russia and Iran, you know, they've entered the 21st century, and there are these new technologies that have just changed everything. You know, they've made certain kinds of uh, military equipment obsolete, and probably the best example of all, I think, is the aircraft carrier. It just said that's, one aircraft carrier is something, what, it's like 10, $11 billion. It's just huge, huge amount of money. And again, if you're dealing with a country that just doesn't have the missile technology or whatever, it can be useful, but for a country that does, you're in trouble. Everything has changed. The tables have turned, and this is not just theoretical. This is what we saw on the Red Sea last year against the Houthis. Now, again, the Houthis they're much poorer. They have much less in the way of these missiles than the Iranians do, but they had some of them, and it was enough that they gave us a real scare. In the end, after a month, he said, yeah, we're getting out of here. It was actually, even before that month ended, we were bottled. My understanding is that the fleet was like way at the north end of the Red Sea, as far as away from Yemen as they could possibly get. And I think all of us saw, or, the footage, or heard about that aircraft carrier that had to take the evasive action because a missile was headed its way. That's an $11 billion craft. That missile was probably, I doubt it was 100,000. It was probably tens of thousands of dollars. And right there, you can just see that, yeah, this is a whole new era, and we haven't really woken up to it. Maybe we'll see it play out. Well, we do seem to have some awareness of it, though, because our aircraft carriers in the Arabian Sea have pulled back 1,000 miles from the coast. But the problem is that you get 1,000 miles from the coast, and then your missiles and your aircraft are, just much less effective. I think a lot of those Tomahawks can only go about 1,000 miles, so that's not going to do you much good. This is something. At least somebody understands that, and that's why those aircraft carriers have moved back. I know it was. I think it's Professor Morandi that's pointed out. He says in Iran, we don't get nervous when the aircraft carrier is close to our shores. It's when it pulls back that we know there's a potential attack, because we know that the Americans understand that we can sink those aircraft carriers. And so, I guess the aircraft carrier's back. That means that they really are thinking about a war. But what kind of war can they wage? Maybe I don't know what's going to happen. Let's see. It may be that the Iranians just hit them with all they got right away, as soon as they see the incoming aircraft and missiles, and they actually sink some ships, and they just, create a lot of mayhem and chaos. Or maybe it'll turn into kind of a war of attrition, but that's bad, equally bad for the Americans, because not only do they not really have the right kind of equipment, to fight a 21st century war, but they don't even have much of what you need to, of what they have already. I know Mark Sloboda points out again and again, and he's completely right, that the Achilles heel of the American military is air defense. And, you know, even, the missiles that we have aren't that great, but we don't have much of them at all. It's just like, my understanding is that within a few days, or all the air defense that we have is going to be used up. And then what do you do, right?
For the next few years. For the next
Right.
few years, what do you do? At that
Right.
point, you're out of business as far as military. All this, well, you better do what we say, or we'll send a aircraft. Hold on a minute, let me check. 2033. You better do what we tell you, buddy, or we'll see you in 2033.
Right. Yeah. Like,
Which ain't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah. Like for the Patriot missiles, I think we're up to 600 a year, but it's just like, you see in the way the rate at which Ukraine is just chewing them up, so that means how many do you have left over for a conflict in the Middle East? Well, I don't know, maybe you got 100 or something. And then that's going to be, maybe good for a couple of days, maybe a week. I don't know. But then, then when you wait for next year, and then, but it's even worse for some of the other missiles like the THAAD. They only make 95 in a year. They're talking about boosting that, but that's going to take years, and it always takes longer than they say. And then I think the SM-3s, that's the kind that's fired from some of our ships. I heard, maybe this isn't true, but I remember hearing on more than one occasion that we make 18 a year. So however you look at it, it may be that, it'll end quickly with an Iranian victory, or maybe it'll turn into this slugfest going back and forth. But if it does turn into the latter, into a war of attrition, you say that, hey, we're not really set up to fight this war.
Here's the thing about it. Listen to the language. It's critical. What does the U.S. say? They're saying war. They say we might, quote, strike Iran.
Yeah.
They don't say war because they know they can't do it. We might strike Iran. That implies we'll punch them. And then I guess they'll fall. I don't know. We're going to strike them. Wham! Boy, we sure struck them. And you think possibly they may strike back continuously for the next 6 months, because we're using the language of the big, powerful guy that works out. He's strong. He benches 400 pounds, but he's got one or two punches and then he's tired. You know what I mean? He comes after, he wants to grab the guy and bear hug him and throw him on the ground. He's going to boom, boom. But if the guy dances around him for a second, he runs out of energy and he falls out on his own. And the little guy who's in shape, who just runs around the ring in circles for a while until the big guy gets tired. We're the big slugger, and all we can do is try to strike you and knock you out. So we strike Iran. Well, what happens if they're very good defensively? We don't have but so many missiles. The country's friggin' the size of Western Europe. And okay, we threw our punch at you, and the Iranians look at us and say, is that all you got? Then what? You struck them, and now they start striking back. That's the thing about it. When Americans talk about war with Iran, we can't. First of all, show me a war in history that did not involve ground troops. Any war everywhere in history that didn't involve ground troops. Not going to happen. If it don't involve ground troops, it ain't a war. There's the Pakistanis and the Indians threw a couple missiles and bombs at each other. That wasn't a war. It lasted for a few days. Even was it Thailand or one of those, and Laos or Cambodia? They threw but they didn't really mix it up. To have a war is a ground war. The U.S. doesn't have a ground war force, and if we did, we couldn't put them in Iran. So here's the truth: we can't have a war with Iran because we don't have any ground troops. We can fly over, we can throw some long distance stuff at them, and then what? The whole thing is preposterous on its face.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that actually some people are even telling Trump that, if you really want to, overthrow the regime or balkanize the country, we've got to go in on the ground. That's the only way to do it. I guess one of the big question marks is what kind of air defense they have. It's clear that the Russians are helping them with air defense. I think that there's no question, but it does take time. You don't know how much they have in place and how much you can do. So there's a chance that they don't have much air defense. Okay, there's a chance. We just don't know. So maybe that first punch is going to hurt. But the thing is, they're not going to fall, and they're going to start punching back. And then you have a real fight and everything. Okay. And then all these problems that we've talked about come into play, and the Iranians understand it. I think the Israelis understand it, and they had a taste of it last year. And that's why they're trying to stay on the sidelines and pretend, just make you go do that.
Well, and here's the thing about it. The Israelis had a 12-hour jump, 12 to 18-hour jump, where
Yeah.
their air defenses and everything were down. They are ready. As soon as
Yeah.
those long distance radar, which would be the Chinese and the Russians, space-based intelligence, and they're like, well, we've got a volley of whatever. We got a volley,
Yeah.
several salvos of what do you call it, of those missiles fired, the what did we call them a second ago, the missiles
The
that we fire,
tomahawks, or
of tomahawks, they're flying in. Well, first of all, they're going to be fired from 800, 900, 1,000 miles away, so you might have 20 minutes and you see that they're fired, which gives your air defense a long time to develop a firing solution. As you said, it gives you a much better time to shoot them down. But now you say, okay, guys, let loose everything you got at them.
Right.
So by the time our missiles get there, they're going to be passing their missiles coming back.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole difference. It's just that they're not going to be, the Iranians were caught with their pants down last time. They let their guard down. I kind of understand. It's like I think they had trouble believing how treacherous we were, and we and the Israelis. But now, that's over. That's not going to happen. And they're making that clear. They're repeating that again and again. We're having these negotiations, but we know that you might attack us in an hour. So we're ready for it. And this time, again, the Chinese have had that surveillance ship, that can see way out there to the horizon and beyond. And as soon as those missiles, like you say, or aircraft or F-35s or B-2s, they come in, they're going to know this time. And they won't wait to get pummeled. They did. The Iranians did suffer some real, serious damage in that first 12 hours or 24 hours. So this is really, this is different. I don't know. It's like I kind of understand, at least, from the diabolical logic of the Israelis and the Americans last time, why they did it. You say, okay, we've got these assets on the ground. We have Operation Rising Lion. We've got these guys there with their drones, and we know we got this software bug that is going to shut down their air defense for a day, and then we've tricked them into thinking that we really are serious about these negotiations. Now we can really get them. I think this is our chance. Let's strike, right? But that's all gone. It's all gone. So what are they thinking? And I think, again, that's like why the Israelis are just trying to stay on the sidelines. I don't think it's going to work out. It's quite obvious that they're pushing for it, but it just I'm still wondering why we let ourselves get into this. I mean, just looking, even if you think you hate Iran and whatever, and all that, I think is the wrong way to look at things, of course. But why? There's just nothing here. There's no precipitating event. There's really no. You have trouble explaining yourself, and then you've also, unless there's some new diabolical plan that we're unaware of, but it just seems very unlikely at this point. It's just like you're not going to repeat what you did last year. That's over. That's done with. So what are you thinking? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm with you. There's no way to know. Right now, I'm going to go with, and a lot of people are breaking me over the coals, I don't think it's going to happen. But you know how that is. As soon as I say I don't think it'll happen, we'll go online and like, they're attacking right now. So
I hope you're right. I just hope you're right. That's all I can say.
Yeah. All right.
Really
Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Peter Erickson, everybody. Conversation Amongst the Ruins. Peter is on weekly, several times a week with his son. And his son Charlie, and of course they'll cut him up into pieces. They'll cut their
we actually have Charlie's created a separate channel for the clips, because some people like to have just focus on certain topics, like they're interested in just Russia and the Ukraine war, or just Iran, or whatever it might be. So it used to be that he would just kind of spam everybody with those clips, but some people were annoyed with. So he's got a separate channel that's just for the clips, and I think it's called, I hope I'm remembering this right, Ruins Report, or
okay,
Ruins
that sounds good.
Something. But anyway, if you go to Conversations Among the Ruins, you'll see it. I think it's a pinned comment at the top, and so you want to go to the clips, you can do that.
All right, thanks a lot. All right, everybody, thank you very much. And don't forget, share this on all your social media platforms. And thank you for all my Patreon and PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee and all that stuff. If you can afford to help the channel, that's highly appreciated. And of course, there's my P.O. box. If you can, please find a way to help the channel. You can snail mail us also. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Peter. We're out.